Boker Tov, thank you everybody for joining us here this morning. Today we're learning Tanya. We're starting chapter 51. Today is Tuesday. It is July 13th, and we are learning Tanya, Deep Jewish Wisdom. We're actually getting quite close to the end of the book of Tanya. We've been doing this for a number of years now, as we have been working through the Tanya. The Tanya is actually a total of 53 chapters, at least in the very first section of Tanya. And we've been through a lot of details, a lot of beautiful details in our own spirituality as we take it now towards the final race towards the end of the first section of Tanya. It's the end of the 53 chapters of Tanya. And in order to really begin today, I need to recap the past 15 or so chapters. So I'd like to use today as some sort of a reason in order for us to tie it all together, to be able to remember where we are, where we're coming from, and where we're going. Your comments are always welcome and appreciated. If you're live, post them please here to YouTube or Facebook. And if you are on listening later, then you can just send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. That's rabbi@jewishgardens.com. I'd like to welcome Marty and Joji and Harvey Barnett and Steve that's with me here in the live studio audience. Okay, so we began the Tanya at the very, very beginning by establishing a fundamental principle, as Howard pointed out to me yesterday, that nobody talks about the voices in your head. You know, if you ever talk to anybody else about the voices in your head, then you're crazy or meshugana. But the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, is the only one that really has the courage to take this on front, full force and say, we do have voices in our head. We actually have two competing voices in our head, every one of us. And if you do, it means that you're normal. Hi, Howard, you just joined us. I'm repeating what you and I discussed yesterday. That we do have voices in our head because we have not one but two souls. And these two souls are competing with each other. There's a godly soul whose purpose is to fulfill the will of God. And there's an animal soul whose purpose it is to fulfill its own desire. Selfish and selfless. Self-centered and God-centered. These are the two souls that work within us, and they both have a full skill set of intellect and emotions. And in the first 25 or so chapters of Tanya, we really went through, in great detail, the anatomy of these souls and the pathology and their relationship of this shidduch of these two living together, and how you were able to reach self-mastery in a long way and in a short way. Then in chapters 26 through 35, we went through soul hacks, which were shortcut methods to dealing with specific problems with our soul, like depression and anxiety, like ego and an inability to get along with your fellow Jew, finding purpose and joy in our daily lives. So those were fascinating soul hacks, chapters 26 through 34. But beginning in chapter 35, we began a journey which we're starting to tie together now in chapter 51. You see, what began in chapter 35 was as follows. Remember that the Tanya was based upon the verse in the end of the Torah, for the thing is very near to you, beficha in your mouth, uvilvavcha in your heart, la'asai to do it. It is very easy for you to be a perfect Jew in thought, speech, and in action, right? Specifically, the Alter Rebbe began chapter 35 by saying, the whole Tanya is built upon this verse about how it is easy to become a perfect Jew in thought, speech, and action. And that's what we did in the first 34 chapters of Tanya, as we just described, which was being able to learn what goes on inside of you, this conflict between your godly soul and your animal soul, and learning about how to allow the godly soul to reign over the animal soul. You've got a horse and a rider. So what are you going to do? If you look at the horse and the rider as moral equivalents, you're going to have problems. You know, the horse is going to want to, go to the bathroom everywhere. And the person is going to want to live like a mensch, right? If they're moral equivalents, there's going to be a problem, right? So you have to realize that the horse serves the rider. And if you're able to realize that, then the horse is able to be a horse and the rider is able to be a rider, instead of, imagine the other way around, sometimes the horse is riding the rider. And then you got total dysfunction. That's what happens in our lives when our godly soul and our animal soul are not getting along with each other, not in harmony. First of all, if you don't even know that you have a godly soul and you only know about your animal soul, then you're like a horse that's riding the rider, and you're inevitably unhappy. But when you learn about the existence of your godly soul and you learn about the existence of your animal soul, and you learn that the horse is supposed to serve the rider, the animal is supposed to serve the godly soul, together you create a beautiful creature. You know, when we went on our last Israel trip, community trip to Israel, we went to Akko. We took the community to Akko on the northern coastline of Israel, and we took them to the Crusader tunnels, where we saw these tunnels where the Crusaders, about this would have been 1,000 years ago, 900 years ago, when the Crusaders came from Europe to fight against the Muslims, and they battled for the prize, which was the Promised Land, the Holy Land. The Crusaders had their fort, their base was in Akko. So you see over there in these tunnels underground, they have these hugely tall tunnels. They were maybe 15 feet tall, the tunnels. And you're wondering, what kind of giants were walking under the ground? But then you realize that it was the Crusaders that rode under the ground on their horses. They refused to disembark from their horses because these Crusader warriors were one with their animal. They were so united with their horse that they refused to disembark unless it was absolutely necessary. So that's why they built these tunnels like 15 feet tall, to be able to fit the horse and the rider, because this is a beautiful creature. There was a war machine. They came from England all the way to the Holy Land to fight a battle, and in many cases they won, because when the horse serves the rider, you can be extremely, extremely productive. And the same goes for our own personal spirituality. When we learn how to harness our animal soul in service of our godly soul, you will live a life which is meaningful, purposeful, fulfilled, and joyous. But if you turn a blind eye to this reality, you turn a blind eye to your own anatomy, to your own pathology, to your own needs, your nutrition, your hydration, your oxygen, your needs, and you say, I'm not interested, then inevitably something is going to be underserviced and you're not going to be happy. So based upon this idea, the Alter Rebbe introduced the verse, for the thing is very near to you in your heart, in your mouth and in your heart, that you may do it. He spoke about the importance of action mitzvahs, to do it. Using this verse, the Alter Rebbe explained that the purpose of our life in this world is in order to serve God through action mitzvahs, contrary to much of the other philosophies or faith groups who believe that faith is something which is ethereal. Faith is something which is removed from this physical world. The less physical, the more godly. And the more physical, the less godly. Tanya says, no, that's not the point. The purpose of life is to serve God with action. And the reason why God created this entire world and all the worlds that preceded this world, what he called Seder Hishtalshelus, the process of evolution of divine energy, the distillation of divine energy through multiple worlds and levels and degradations, was in order to create this physical world, a place where godliness is completely concealed, the purpose of which would be for God to create for us to create for God a home in this physical world. And this is what we call Dira B'Tachtonim, a home in the lower realms. And that's an idea that was introduced in Tanya chapter 35. Then we introduced an analogy from the Zohar, from the Kabbalah, a fascinating analogy, which is how we begin chapter 51. The analogy in the Zohar goes like this. It says that a Jew should never walk 4 cubits, like 8 feet, without a yarmulke on his head, because the divine presence, the Shekhinah, rests above him, just like a lamp that needs oil in order to burn. Again, a Jew should never walk 8 feet without a yarmulke on his head, or 6 feet without a yarmulke on his head, because the divine presence rests upon his head, just like a lamp that needs oil in order to burn. What's going to happen if the oil runs out? Then the flame of the lamp will expire. So too, a Jew who doesn't do mitzvahs will unfortunately have the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to be removed from above him. It was this analogy from the Zohar that the Alter Rebbe used to launch the discussion that went all the way through from chapter 35 all the way through to chapter 51, which is where we resume that analogy right now, but I need to fill in the gaps just to refresh your memory on what we've done in the interim. We said that the oil is mitzvahs. The Alter Rebbe explained that the oil is mitzvahs and Torah that allow the flame to burn, the flame of divine presence, the flame of Shekhinah. Shekhinah means to dwell, to rest, the divine presence that dwells upon us, above his head at all times. And what is the wick? The wick is the body. So again, just like a candle is a wick, a flame, and oil. So too, the wick is our body, the flame is the divine presence, and the oil that allows the divine presence to stay in the wick is Torah and mitzvahs. In that chapter, the Alter Rebbe explained that oil is specifically mitzvahs and Torah, and not the godly soul. You would think that your godly soul is enough, or is good enough to be oil. You think that the godly soul is good enough to maintain, to provide the fuel for the divine presence to rest upon us. But the Alter Rebbe there explained that the godly soul is, at the end of the day, a separate and distinct entity. Even though it is a piece of God, it is me separate from you. And the analogy that Alter Rebbe used in chapter 35 was that when I love you, when I love someone else, you cannot be one and the same. Only two separate entities are able to love each other. My left arm cannot love my right arm. Why? Because they're one and the same. I cannot love my right arm because my right arm is me. But I can love you because you and I are separate entities. So when our godly soul is able to love God, and we know that it can love God, therefore, by definition, per force, it is a separate entity. And as a separate entity, it's not good enough to be fuel, to be oil for the fire of godly presence to rest upon us. So the godly soul is not sufficient oil to in the analog to allow the divine presence to rest upon us. What is considered oil, and this is a vital piece of information here, it is only Torah and mitzvahs, which are perfectly united with God. They are literally the manifestation of the will of Hashem, Torah and mitzvahs, and therefore they are like a perfect, beautiful, seamless oil that allows the light to shine beautifully as long as we have the oil of Torah and mitzvahs. And then we explained that there are actually two levels of this oil. There's Torah oil and there's mitzvah oil. The Torah allows the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to burn upon the more spiritual elements of our lives. Remember, we have three garments. We have thought, speech, and action. So thought and speech are more spiritual, obviously, and action is more physical, right? So when we study Torah like we're doing right now, we're creating an oil that allows the Shekhinah, the divine presence, to burn upon us in the more spiritual elements of us, and that is the thought and the speech elements of our soul. But if you want to bring the divine presence to burn in the very lowest part of the wick of the body, to draw down into the action part of the body, and actually to be drawn down into the animal soul. If you want that fire of Hashem to light upon, not only upon your godly soul and the elevated parts of your body, but also upon the lower parts of your body and your animal soul, if you'd like to do that, then you have to do that through mitzvahs which are physical. Because in order to fulfill a physical mitzvah, you need the assistance of the physical body. Think about it. To study Torah, you don't really need the assistance of your physical body. You could do it in bed. But to do a mitzvah, to buy a lulav and an esrog, to give tzedakah, you got to work. You got to work to make money, to give money to charity, right? So you need the involvement of your physical body and your nefesh habamis, your godly soul, in order to participate in the mitzvah. And therefore, when you're able to do a mitzvah, physical mitzvah, it's then that your godly soul, it's then that the fire, the Shekhinah, is burning not only upon your body, the elevated parts of your body, but upon the lower elements of your body, upon your action, and your power of action, and your body and your animal soul. So this idea, I just want you to think of a flame. You know, when you have a fire, when you have a light in your dining room, what kind of light do you want? Do you want a weak light? Do you want a crackling light? Or do you want a nice bright light? Same question applies. You know, what do you feel like when you walk into a room where the light is sort of crackling and you feel like, something's about to break at any moment? So too upon your godly soul. Sorry, not your godly soul. Upon in your person. If you want the light to shine upon you in the proper way, then you've got to be able to provide the proper oil. Like in your car. If you put diesel in your gas engine or vice versa, you're going to have oil, but it's probably going to cause the engine to break down. If you want the godly light to shine upon you, all of you, you've got to have both Torah and mitzvah oil as well in tandem. The Alter Rebbe then proceeded to explain. That was in chapter 35. But then in chapter 36 and 37, the Alter Rebbe proceeded to explain that it's the physical mitzvahs that are the ultimate purpose of creation, because they are the ones that create the dira b'tachtonim, the home for God in this physical world. Just like your action mitzvahs draw God upon your physical body, so too the action mitzvahs draw God upon the physical world with which the mitzvah was fulfilled. The matzah with the flour, Flour. The tzedakah draws God into your money and into your bank account. The kosher draws God into your kitchen and your digestive system. The laws of mikveh draw God into your bedroom. The laws of kosher clothing and kosher farming draws God into your closet, into the mall, and into the farmland, respectively. And that's why it's so important to be able to observe physical mitzvahs. It's not enough to say that I'm a good Jew in my heart, because then you're abdicating the purpose for which you were placed into this earth. You're abdicating your mission for which you were sent into this earth. And that's why the physical mitzvahs are so important, because of the doctrine of dira b'tachtonim, the doctrine of making for God a home in this physical world. Yet, and here's the kicker. That was chapters 36 and 37, a very fundamental concept. But then the Alter Rebbe proceeded to explain that our kavana, our intention, is still vital. Notwithstanding the importance of the physical action, the intent with which we fulfill the physical action is vital in order to ensure the highest quality of godliness being drawn down below. So in other words, there's two elements at play here. On the one hand, you need to have a physical mitzvah observed with your animal soul, with every element of your physical body, and with the physical world with which you're doing the mitzvah, because you do a physical action mitzvah in the physical world. So you need that's in order to create the destination to create a home for God in this physical world. But at the same time, it's the intent with which you fulfill the mitzvah that decides which degree of godliness is drawn down to this world. So it's one thing to create a home in this world, but what are you creating a home for? For that you need the right kind of meditation, the right kavana, the right intent in the fulfillment of your mitzvah. And that is what kicked off that discussion in chapters 38, 39, and 40 is what kicked off this fascinating journey, which we journeyed through in chapters 41 all the way through 50, where the Alter Rebbe explained the various forms and levels of love that allow this kind of intent to manifest in the godliness drawn down below. So when you fulfill an action mitzvah and you're motivated by love, by the proper kind of love, whether it was an expirational kind of love that we learned in chapter 50, or a reciprocal love, which wasn't even one that needed meditation and just needed reflection, a reciprocal love that we discussed in chapters 46 through 49. Whichever kind of love, or a burning love, a flaming love, a water love, a fire love, different kinds of love that we discussed in chapters 41 through 50. When you're able to observe a mitzvah, a physical mitzvah, motivated by that kind of love, now you're drawing down pure godliness all the way down to the basement, down to the bottom floor, to this physical world. And now you are truly fulfilling the concept, the purpose of life, of dira b'tachtonim, of making a home for God in this physical world. And it's with that introduction that we're finally able to tie things together to return back to chapter 51. I just want to give you a quick example, by the way. If you love someone and you just do emotionless deeds for them, like let's say you pay your child pocket money, but you do so without any emotion, without a smile, without any warmth, without a hug, without a kiss. Did they receive the money? The answer is yes. They got the money that they needed. But if it was void of emotion, you're not exactly building the relationship, right? Same thing with God. Do we have such a shallow relationship with our Maker, with our Father in heaven, that we are just like the parent that is emotionlessly delivering the goods without life? Imagine you feed your children. You serve them cereal without any expression in your face, or you serve them a dinner without any expression in their face, and you actually disappear. You go back to play on your phone. What kind of parent would you be? You just give them their dinner, and then you sit in there all dinner long on your phone. Like what exactly is that? You can't. Nobody can accuse you of not having fed your children, but at the same time, you cannot claim to have any sort of relationship with your children by doing that. And that's the kind of challenge which I ask you today, is what kind of relationship do you have with God? Do you have a shallow, empty relationship with God? Or do you have a lively, dynamic, real relationship with God? Andy, to draw the blessings of the divine presence on your body. To draw the blessings of the divine presence on your body and physical aspects of your life, to physical mitzvahs with the body parts in which you want the blessings. Do physical mitzvahs with the body parts on which you want the blessings. Is that accurate or overly specific? It is accurate, Andy. I'm understanding the question. Every physical part of the body with which you do the mitzvah draws down godliness to that part of the body and to that part of the world. And it's accurate and it's not overly specific. I'm not sure exactly the question that you're asking. Steve, so this leads us into the opening of chapter 51. Where the opening of chapter 51, after all of this discussion about the importance of the physical mitzvah, and ultimately about the, still, that notwithstanding the importance of the physical mitzvah, how important it is nonetheless to have the intent, the kavanah, the meditation, the emotion. Now the Alter Rebbe comes back to the mashal, to the analogy of the Yanukah, of the child, which said in the Zohar, the child called out and declared a person, a Jew, should not walk 6 or 8 feet without a yarmulke, because the divine presence rests on his head, just like a lamp needs oil in order to burn. Here, the Alter Rebbe ties it all together in chapter 51, 52, and 53. He's asking a question about the meaning of the dwelling of the divine presence. How is it? How is it that the divine presence really dwells upon us? He gets into a discussion in the next 3 chapters that allows us to understand the metaphor in a much more intimate level. How is it that the divine presence is really able to rest upon us? And he gets into a discussion here in chapter 50, where he asks, we know the divine presence was resting in the holy temple in Jerusalem, in the Beit HaMikdash. You come to a shul, and the Holy Ark, why is it called the Holy Ark? Because the divine presence is in there, the Torah. That's why you're supposed to behave differently in a shul. People put in a yarmulke when they come into a shul because of the divine presence. The shul is a miniature temple, but the original, the powerhouse, the powerhouse is the original temple in Jerusalem, and that, my friends, is the question with which we begin the chapter here in 51. I'm going to end it here because I have to take this call. So I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful day. Thank you very much. Shalom. Hello. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry this is an urgent call, but I'm going to take the call right now, and I wish you all a wonderful day. Shalom. So,